My name is Elke, and I'm going to talk about some of the registered finds that we uncovered from 85 Stepney Way in Whitechapel. And then Sarah over there is going to talk about how we use the site to support local engagement. The star find from the site was the Elizabethan theatre, but from a finds perspective, there were very few artifacts that related directly to that structure. So what we did find was a very large assemblage of 17th and 18th century artifacts, which were all the hallmarks of having originated from an inn or a tavern, and it is on those finds that I'm concentrating today. First, a brief overview of excavations. So between 2015 and 2017, we undertook a series of watching briefs and evaluations. And then in 2018 and 19, we undertook full-scale excavations. The earliest remains from the site were a Middle Iron Age enclosed settlement. And we also found signs of Roman activity. Then in medieval times, the site was part of the Manor of Stepney. It was probably open land, probably meadows. We found substantial building remains in one corner of the site, and these are related to a later phase when the Manor of Stepney was subdivided in smaller estates or sub-manors, and it's probably the sub-manor estate house of Ashreys. There was an associated yard, and there were also pathways and agricultural land. By the 16th century, this farming estate was known as the Red Lion. In the northeast, again, a farmhouse was built with an associated yard, and there were various phases of redevelopment of both. And then in 1567, the playhouse was built. It consisted of a stage as well as galleries. The galleries remained in use until at least 1580, after which they were abandoned. The stage itself seemed to have been in use for much longer, had various stages of abandonment and then renewal again. At one point it was a below-ground structure, and then eventually it was backfilled with a lot of debris from the nearby inns. From the start of the stage, from when the stage was built, or the playhouse, the Red Lion seems to have been serving alcohol. It certainly did throughout the 17th century, but then in the late 17th or early 18th century, our material culture drops off, and there's no evidence at the minute that it was commercially serving alcohol beyond that. And this was probably at the same time of a change of hands, and it looks like the Red Lion reverted back to being domestic, probably lived in by a family, the Heath family, until 1772, when the site was sold off to the London Hospital. And going back to when the Red Lion went out of use as an inn, at the same time as that happened, in the northwest corner, a new building is built, which was by 1713 known as the Gardener's House. We clipped a corner on the site, which may well have been this gardener's house. If it wasn't that, it was certainly very close, but we can tell from the material culture from there. In the mid-18th century, that became known potentially as the White Lion, and then by 1772, it was known as the White Raven, and that's how I will refer to this building, to not make it too confusing. The White Raven was serving alcohol from the very start. It may have overlapped with the Red Lion, but it could also have replaced it. And we then, it remains in use into the 18th century, all the way through into the 19th century, but our material culture drops off in the late 18th century, and it may be that the focal points slightly shifted. Then in the 19th century, the northern half of the site becomes industrialized, but in the southern half, a new street is constructed called Russell Street, a residential street with terraced housing, in the middle of which there is a public house which is known as the Fox, and that sort of concludes the history of the site as an area of entertainment. We had very large quantities of finds, in particular pottery, glass, clay tobacco pipe, and animal bone were huge assemblages. Within the pottery and glass assemblage, there was a very high proportion of drinking vessels, as well as bottles for serving or storing alcohol. There is also evidence for tea being served and, to a lesser degree, coffee. At the same time, we had huge quantities of clay tobacco pipes, particularly for the period 1680 to 1710. A lot of this came actually from the stage backfill, and we are wondering whether that is a clearance for the Red Lion Inn. But the whole period from the late 16th century all the way through to the 19th century was represented. The makeup of ceramics and glass is completely in keeping with Bragdon's model for the material culture of drinking establishments, and is also in keeping with Jackie Pierce's later work on the Uxbridge Inn. So from the makeup of the site, of the assemblage, we can say that we've got a material culture for two different inns or taverns, the White Raven and the Red Lion, spanning at least 2 centuries. And from sort of the types of material that are in there, we know that at least one of them was an inn rather than a tavern. We recovered over 1,000 registered finds. They're in all ranges of materials, metalwork, worked bone and ivory, glass, and so on. As I mentioned before, there are very few that actually related to directly to the playhouse. So there were just a handful of plain dress pins, there were some lace shapes, and there was a single buckle, and that was it. We did find a lot of 17th and 18th century material, and nearly all of that was directly related to the glass, pottery, and clay pipe that we know are from taverns inns. So by association, we know that nearly all of the registered finds, if not all, are part of the inn material culture. Some activities that you would expect to be represented, we didn't really find much of. For example, we know that food was served from other materials, but we found hardly any kitchen equipment. So we found part of a skimmer or strainer, and we found some iron vessel fragments, but that was it. And you'd imagine a much bigger amount of kitchen equipment. And it just shows that even when you have huge quantities recovered that we had to work with there, you are still only looking at a fraction of the original material. This is a quote from John Stripe giving some of the leisure activities that 18th century people undertook. We have, of course, copious evidence of the drinking culture from our ceramics and glass. We had some further evidence of that within our registered finds assemblage. So we found a very early iron corkscrew. You can see that on the X-ray there. And we also found a set of 6 barrel taps, as well as 2 further barrel tap handles or keys. There was also a tap which was actually from a water cistern rather than a barrel. The taps are all of 18th century date, and most were found in a cellar in the Red Lion, which led us originally to believe that maybe it was still serving alcohol commercially into the 18th century, but there is no other material culture to back up that claim, so it was probably just a cellar of a wealthy household. There were taps that could be locked with these keys, could be taken away. There were also just taps that couldn't be locked, and the combination, well, it's something that you'd expect in an inn. It's also something that you'd have in a bigger household, where perhaps the head of household or a senior member of staff is the key holder and keeps the more expensive spirits and wines under lock and key. Several sources describe this type of games that they were playing in the 17th and 18th centuries. So in the left-hand corner is the 1746 John Rock map. You can see next to our White Raven there is a bowling green. And we did, in fact, on the northern periphery of that, find a bowling ball in lignum vitae, which is a very specific wood typically used for bowling balls, in a pit together with pottery dating to 1750 to 1780. Other sources tell us that Skittles were being played to the back of the White Raven. We have eyewitness accounts from the Old Bailey records that tell us that that went on from at least the later 18th century. We did not actually find any Skittles, though. Gaming and gambling were evidenced by Nuremberg chattels, which were made in the 16th century and which were deposited in the 17th century. And we also found a single ivory domino piece. Then, in the middle of the slide, you can see a pipe-clay cockerel missing its head. A very popular game in post-medieval times was cockshying, and it involved a live cockerel which was being trained at with sticks, and the person who would kill the bird would be the winner, probably taking the bird home for the soup or something. It was a game that was particularly popular with children. To our 21st century minds, this is quite a cruel game. Also, by the 18th century, they started frowning upon this. So they started replacing the live birds with ceramic cockerels. There are pictorial, there's pictures of that. There's documentary evidence as well. There's a description of these cockerels being fastened onto a lead stand. The example from Whitechapel is in pipe clay, and Chris Jarrett did a lot of work on pipe clay cockerels of this period in London. There are a few of them, and he believes that these may well be have been used to replace these live cockerels. The example from Whitechapel was found on the periphery of the Raven Yard, and dates to the early 18th century. Once the live birds were replaced by ceramic examples, the game didn't really sort of start losing its popularity and didn't last very long anymore after that. We also have some evidence of the music that was being played. So we found two mouth harps. One was found in association with the Red Lion and dates to the 17th century. A second one was found near the Red Raven and dates to the late 17th to mid 18th century. Mouth harps are common finds. They were very popular because they were portable. They were also very cheap to acquire, and everyone could play them, although not everyone could play them very well. We don't know obviously how they came in. They could have been coming in with professional musicians. They would have used them, but at the same time it could also be a customer or anyone working around the yard or the inns. A very special find was in the top right-hand corner there, the mouthpiece of a French horn. It was found in an 18th century cesspit related to the White Raven. It dates to the 18th century stylistically, probably the second half. Mouthpieces from French horns don't survive very much. There's just one other example in Europe, which is from a shipwreck. So they're very uncommon finds. Speaking to modern day horn players, they sometimes carry the mouthpiece separately from the actual horn for a whole range of reasons, for example, safekeeping, and they would carry them on their person. So you can see how it would get separated, how they would get separated from each other and lost. The horn players might have played in the inn. They could also have performed outside in the yard. There are contemporary tutor books which have songs about tavern visits in them, and there is also a song which is called the Tower Hamlets March. Another group of interesting finds consists of these probable spyglasses. So you can see two bone tubes. They are from two separate objects, two different two-piece spyglasses. And then there is a third one, which is in iron. As you can see, the X-ray as well. All three were found in layers above the stage, so well after the stage was abandoned, really quite close together. Which is quite curious because they're very unusual finds and rare finds as well. So the Bain spyglasses, I think only a couple of others are known in London. There's a few in other cities like Amsterdam. There has been a recent find by Mola of a workshop from the Clitheroe family at New Cemetery, where they found loads of these tubes in various stages of manufacture. But the finished product is a very rare find. The iron spyglass we so far have not found any parallels for. So it's curious to find that they are all three on the same side and so close together, and we don't know, would that have meant that they were viewing something from around the stage, whether that area was still used in some way, we don't know. It could have been that performances were still taking place, well after the abandonment of the stage, or they might have been watching something in the nearby fields, for example, maybe hunting or racing. We do have evidence of some other activities. For example, there's some suggestion from the animal bone that in the 17th century animal baiting took place, and we also have an iron arrowhead, which was for hunting. So that other things did take place there, but we'll obviously never know what exactly they were doing there. We have also got some some evidence of small-scale ivory working dating to the 17th century. There's only a handful of fragments scattered across the site, but they were all from various stages of sort of the base of the ivory working. So you can see the central one's got a perforation. It's the base of a tusk, an elephant tusk. The perforation is probably for transporting. For transport, they were sort of bunched together. There's another piece which has an incised cross, which was perhaps a trader's mark. Whilst we found very little ivory, it doesn't mean that the works didn't go on on the site, because ivory workers were very frugal with their raw materials. We also found some evidence for boneworking, probably of 18th century dates in the yard of the Red Lion. That consisted of 13 cattle metapodia, probably for turning. It's quite well known for inns of that period that the parts of the yard were rented out to craftspeople or small businesses, and that may well be what was going on here. Not all finds relate to in life. There were also personal possessions, and one of the nicest one was this little jar made of lead. It would have contained theriac, which was a medicine with Greek and Roman roots. It was one of these medicines with a lot of functions that you get in that period. So it was a plague remedy, but it was also an antidote for poison, for example. It was manufactured under very strict rules. I think originally they were mostly from Venice, but by the 17th century, this dates to the late 17th, perhaps very early 18th century. By that time, it was manufactured in London, but it was still seen as, the Venetian theriac was still seen as superior. Our little jar has a lid with a Madonna and Child, and a Della Madonna is written on it. And that means the sign of the Madonna. So all the apothecaries in Venice, their names were the sign of a whole range of things. So this comes from there. I think the apothecary actually still exists now. It's a very rare object. We only have 2 other Della Madonna lids in the UK, one in Surrey, which is on the Portable Antiquities Scheme database, and one from the Thames. The complete vessels are super rare. There's about 2 or 3 in Europe, and there is one in the Wellcome collection, which has no provenance. So this is potentially the only one in the UK that has survived. Then a few other finds that were quite interesting. So top left, you've got a graphite pencil. This particular pencil was found in a post hole of a fence line, with no dating evidence, unfortunately, but it probably dates to the late 16th or early 17th century. Graphite was only discovered in the late 16th century in the Lake District. At first, they would use these sticks with like string wrapped around it to hold it, and then later they started using sticks. Our example for Whitechapel is made of 2 pieces of roundwood, one of which has a channel carved into it, and it still has the graphite surviving. It's again another rare discovery. We haven't really found any parallels in the UK. There is a parallel found in a house in, I think, Austria, where it was possibly left by carpenters. Another find is the part of a toothbrush, so the handle is missing. The earliest known toothbrushes that are published are of mid-18th century date, but this one comes from a context dating at the very latest to the very early 18th century, so before, it's now one of the earliest toothbrushes. There's no parallels of this date, and there are also no parallels of this particular design. The little barrel that you can see is probably a flea trap. It dates to the 18th or 19th century. So they would have these little barrel-shaped objects, carry them on their person, underneath their clothes or in their wigs, or they might wear it as a pendant. And they had to trap fleas by means of a cloth that was positioned centrally in the barrel, which would have had a drop of blood on it and honey, and hopefully they would catch fleas in that way. And then finally, you can see the thumb there, which is on display on the table next door. When we found it, we thought it was made of plaster. It dates to the 18th up to very early 19th century and was found in the Red Lion. Analysis by UCL has shown that it's actually pipe clay, which is very unusual. You can see the skin texture, so it was taken from a live person, but probably because of the stance of the thumb, we think it's a live person rather than a diseased person. It was probably taken from a plaster mold. And we tried to look for other examples in pipe clay, but this is the only one, and it could well have been just a one-off experiment. There is, the London Hospital is very close by, and it's possible that it's a pathological example, but all of the other ones known from there are in plaster. That's the end of my overview of some of the finds. It's obviously a very small part of the entire assemblage. Whilst the discovery of the Red Lion Playhouse has been of great interest, the main importance of the post-medieval finds assemblage lies in its direct association with the White Raven and the Red Lion Inn. There do not appear to be any published examples of inn or tavern assemblages of this size or spanning this many centuries. And the combined finds categories give therefore an unprecedented insight in the material culture of drinking establishments.
Thank you, Elke. I'm Sarah Wolferstan, and I've been working on coordinating partnerships for public engagement at this site since late 2023. But before I share our progress on this particular site, I just want to give a little bit of a background as to why we're taking the particular approach that we are at Whitechapel. I think we could all recognise that the last decade, 15 years, has been a big change in how we're supposed to be planning for public benefit as commercial archaeologists. We're being asked to make a lot more effort to consider our environmental impact as companies and improve the economic and social values and the well-being of the communities in which we work. No mean feat. So this is our site now at Whitechapel. It's now called the Silk District. And the Archaeological Heritage Management Plan developed by the site consultant, Susanna Parker, incorporated lots of plans for outreach through interpretation at the site. And you can see on this picture, this was in the planning conditions, the height of the stage marked on that monolith over there on the left. And there's differential paving that reproduces the dimensions of the stage and the theatre. And there's also differential paving for the Iron Age settlement, which was on the site. You can see a section of the medieval manor house that was moved and put into one of the gardens. And that sort of sketch at the bottom there shows you where there's the developer had to pay for temporary seating that was going to be moved out onto the stage area for festivals that will be run by the borough and or the residents that live there now. And there is a condition actually to have a festival at the site, but it's been in planning for a couple of years now. I'm really hoping it happens. We've also got some bronze casts, I think, being made at the moment that are going to be of objects from the site, and a 3D model of the theatre that's going to be part of the interpretation. In terms of the outreach, that we were a little bit restricted by the client's brief, so we couldn't get on site during the excavation, and that was partly due to practicalities because it was a really deep site and hard to get people into. And also there was a restriction on outreach until the excavations were finished. So we could only then start doing sort of social media. And here's Emily, who's in charge of our digital engagement and social media at ASE. There were some other conditions about what we could say in our blogs. We weren't allowed to mention any bones, which, considering there was a rather large amount of them, and that Emily is our animal bones specialist, must have been quite a hard thing to eliminate from the social media, but she coped. So the reason why we weren't allowed to talk about bones, I've been told, is because the client didn't want to put off future buyers. Anyway, so the reaction to these posts, which were shared on our blogs, but also on the developers' blogs, was good. But the reach of a press release on the Red Lion Theatre was even better. We coordinated that with UCL's media division, and it was picked up by both the national and the international press. So we're now in a different phase now, and we're trying to sort of walk more hand in hand and build grassroots engagement with the local community. They weren't really aware that the site was happening, as we found out when we started talking to the local archive service and the heritage team at the borough. So our first step was to work as a team of ASE to work out which bits of the site that we thought would really sort of resonate with the local borough. And we were inspired by Susanna's management plan and by the work of another of our partners, Dr. Callan Davis, who's a playhouse historian. And he's really worked very hard to sort of situate Tudor playhouses in their contexts. And he writes that they overlapped with other types of cultural and social institutions, including occupational groups, local political structures, community bodies, and identities. So this kind of inspired us to think about how we could situate the lost playhouse story with the story of this lost tavern, especially as that's where a lot of our material culture had come from. And also the tavern, the White Raven, relates quite strongly to important world events, the history of colonialism and the abolitionist movement. So during the 18th century, let me explain, the White Raven Tavern was frequented by black loyalist soldiers. These were men who had been enslaved by the British and were promised their freedom if they fought against the American patriots in the colonies during the wars of the independence, late 18th century. So by the time they came to London to seek their freedom, the East End was already a centre for London's black population, with some estimates putting the number of black Londoners at 20,000. That's a contemporary estimate, an 18th century estimate. So roughly 1 in 50 by the latter half of the century. The White Raven was chosen as one of the 2 locations where the London Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor held its meetings throughout 1786 and 87. They distributed alms, and they consulted with potential settlers for a new colony in Sierra Leone. The committee was well known to prominent black abolitionists, some of whom went on to form the first all-black political organisation of its kind in Britain, called the Sons of Africa in 1787. So during the next step of our analysis, we decided how we were going to approach this as ASE, as UCL. We had seen that there wasn't much out there about this lost tavern, the White Raven, and there really wasn't much storytelling going on about the Tower Hamlets' sort of radical abolitionist past. There was some efforts going on to tell the story and shed light on Black Londoners from the 16th to the 19th century, because currently most of the commemoration and memorialisation is linked to 20th century heritage and the Windrush generation. But as historians of this period are very quick to point out that there were black people in Britain and in London before the World War II in the 50s. So to start this process off, I reached out to speak to people who I thought might be able to help us to frame this story. And luckily, the Institute of Archaeology had a recent graduate, Mercedes Baptiste Halliday, who has founded an organisation called Black Archaeo. Her aim is to increase the engagement of urban black and brown people in archaeology and heritage, her words. I also contacted Alim Kamara. You can see their logos up here. Alim is set up Stories, He's an East London oral storyteller, performance storyteller, musician, and is well known in the Black History School scene. He was recommended to me by somebody else who's a very good storyteller, who I also involved in the project later. Alim grew up in London, but his parents are from Sierra Leone, so we thought that these young Londoners might be able to give us a good steer on how to set up this project. Because we are the university, we managed to get some cash out of them, yay. And so with UCL East support, Alim and Mercedes came on a site tour, led by Steve White, the lead archaeologist for the site, and were introduced to key objects by the lovely Elke. So Mercedes took some time to explain her approach to working with young people in London, and Alim told us some funky stories, and was inspired to write a poem about the complexities of liberation and colonialism from his lived experience. After this phase, we asked Mercedes for her impressions of the Whitechapel Central Archaeology Project, and here's an excerpt of her evaluation, her video evaluation.
I've been working in the area for several years, and I actually ran like an archiving sort of project for a local school. And when I was like researching and prepping for the project, I did look at the history of Whitechapel, and I was particularly interested in the histories of Black and Brown people, but I didn't see anything in reference to the White Raven. And so I think that just goes to show how unknown it is as a history, and I've never kind of spoken to anyone about it before. It's very strange because I probably would have walked past this site weekly, and I think that just speaks to the incredible nature of archaeology, is that we interact with the landscape and we're not always fully aware of it, but once we become aware of it, we feel like we're part of the landscape in a way. I think it has changed my opinion of developers, and I think it's a great example of how actually developer-led archaeology can work, and it can do good, and it can have kind of a community output to it, and I would love to do more work around this.
We asked a similar set of questions of Alim, and here is another excerpt.
It's about reclaiming narrative and ensuring that our stories are told authentically. So for me, it's personal. My ears perk up when I hear Sierra Leone, because it's not a story often told, let alone a country people have heard of. So this is about honouring heritage, celebrating history and culture that shaped me. I was also happy to know that there are links being discovered and that they're not being hidden or sugar-coated. The story also confronts the dark chapters of history, which might invoke feelings of empathy, reflection, or discomfort. Ultimately, I believe it will encourage audiences to appreciate the complexities of our shared past and inspire meaningful conversations. My knowledge of archaeology is now beyond just picture books and museum glass windows. The same way oral storytellers must piece together stories, archaeologists do the same, connect the dots. I got to touch real pieces that were discovered, from pipes to cutlery, without the initiative to consider what lies beneath. All could have been lost. Yeah, all could have been lost, you know.
He's a real dude. And thank you to Emily for helping with that aspect of the project and pulling those videos together. So our original aim with that first bit of project was to, with Alim and Mercedes' help, write a joint press release, because actually we haven't sort of made a big announcement about finding the White Raven. We wanted to not just use our words as archaeologists. So at this point, we then found out about 2 other projects that have been going on in the borough about Black history. So we wanted to contact them to be part of this press release. The thing is that some of the participants of one of those projects that had happened 20 years ago, they'd already found the White Raven about 80 metres north of our excavation. So it kind of led to a little bit of a sort of political situation. And the thing is, they had been running health through history projects above, in this Whitechapel mission, above the presumed White Raven. Although, to be fair, they had asked at that point for further research to be done to work out whether it was. And if they had been able to do map progressions and a bit of serious historical research, they probably would have concluded that it wasn't where they were having their meetings. But we didn't want to kind of ramrod them into agreeing with us. So we agreed to not do a press release yet, but to try to do a little bit more of discussing the evidence from the archaeological site and a little bit more history together so that we could reach sort of a joint position. The second project we're also trying to integrate with was very aligned with what we were trying to do. It was trying to look for the names of Black Londoners seeking to liberate themselves from the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. So that's a Tower Hamlets project supported by Historic England with Section 106 money. I think people lobbied really hard for that money, actually, and I'm glad that they got it. And I wish people would talk to archaeologists about Section 106 money as well. That's just my little wish list. So we got some more money off UCL, Grand Challenge funding, which is for cross-cutting research and partnerships across the university, and had a second site visit and a larger workshop this last summer. And we invited all those community historians to try to work out, what they based their evidence on. We were joined by UCL students and other staff, both technical staff, academic staff, and support staff, for UCL's Access cohort. And those are quite often Black and minority students who are the first generation to go to university. The day was set up by a professional storyteller and facilitator, an external facilitator, Claire Murphy. She was brilliant. We learned practical storytelling techniques and heard examples of how oral storytelling has been used as a foundation for social justice projects. And we thought that this was a really good moment to go into the borough with an archaeology project that was aiming to get social justice impact. So we thought we would have the press release resolved with that, but we didn't. So we have it on ice still, the press release. But the good news is we've got a little bit more money. And we are, that was their publication, by the way, this nice orange, the Power Writers. That was the publication they wrote above in the Whitechapel mission that they thought was the White Raven. And it's about some of the prominent Black writers of the 18th century. So yeah, we've got a bit more money, and the long and the short of it is now that we've done another archive workshop with these community historians, and we're putting on an exhibition with the help of UCL Culture Lab. That's based in UCL East. That should be on from June. You can see some of the objects that Elke showed you, and you can also see some of the work that the community historians have done to sort of talk about health through history. Our hope is that we're going to put in a few more bids to do a new version of their health through history project, looking at our evidence, looking at the archive, and creating a new generation of people interested in the Black history and the wider trajectories of archaeology and history in Whitechapel. We're also writing an article together for CBA, so keep your eye open for that. We've got a few more partnerships that are bubbling. I've listed them here, and I won't go on about them because I'm aware everybody wants their tea. So yeah, keep an eye on our website for news of the exhibition, the project, and how we grow from here into the future. Thank you very much.